Hello, and good evening. Welcome to another episode of Between the Presets, a podcast by me, Rudy Stettner, that comes out every Monday evening. Here is the place where anything that can be said in polite company is fair game for discussion, even if it occasionally offends. Let's roll. It is the evening of the 19th of Sivan, 5784, that being June 24th, 2024. Here in New York City, the weather was a welcome relief from the heat wave we've been having, which is a humid temperature in the 90s, which means the evaporating sweat has no place to go when it's that humid. I was wondering what people did in the days before air conditioning to cope with the weather. And in the days before refrigeration, people actually used to mine blocks of ice, like they would harvest them in the winter or in northern climates where the winter is longer, and they used to, I guess, keep them underground in insulated enclosures. And what people literally had were ice blocks. They would sell blocks of ice from block to block, and that's what kept people's refrigerators or coolers or whatever they were called going. Also, in some cities, they had sloping roofs where the roof would, provide a lot of shade over the street, and that provided a natural barrier to the sun. And that kept homes cooler, as did the big shutters people had, which kept the sun from heating up the rooms. And combining that with windows which were optimally situated for cross ventilation, and there was some respite from extreme heat, which must have been very useful in warmer parts of the United States. The other natural respite, free of air conditioning from the heat, is to go down into a basement. That's an option which I don't have, but I find in the summer there's natural coolness, and in the winter the extremes don't get so pronounced either. I was watching some of my grandchildren playing computer games. It was a perfectly designed experience where there was flashing lights, bright colors, bells and whistles literally engaging them at every turn, and a system of levels of proficiency in the game that anybody who gets hooked on these games finds vitally important to get to the highest level. What I did was I showed the kids a video. There's a viral video that started on TikTok of a baby singing. It has instrumentation in the background, and you can tell that it's spliced and edited. But the kid looks to be about 6 months old and is singing this catchy melody that gets stuck in your head. If you use the search term baby singing, you will find that. Some of my younger grandchildren love that one. Some of them, for the older ones, I had videos of Komodo dragons. Now, Komodo dragon is the largest lizard in the world. You do not want to have it as a household pet. Although they tend to go after smaller mammals, they will and have attacked human beings. They can be absolutely monstrous killing machines, but they're fascinating to look at. It's just huge, huge lizards. They also have a toxic bite. I think it's mostly toxic because their mouth is so infested with bacteria that anyone who gets bitten by a Komodo dragon almost immediately comes down with some sort of horrific infection. But they're fun to watch. I like them on video. I would not want to get anywhere near them in the wild. They live in Indonesia, I think the Philippines. So I don't have to worry about a Komodo dragon sneaking into the United States on a banana boat and, climbing up through my toilet or something like that. So of my many fears, I do not have a fear of Komodo dragons reaching New York City. We got enough other problems. One of the things, although YouTube is unfortunately censored with a political bias, it's still a good resource for documentaries, old TV shows, and speeches and newsreels from times past. One of the things that I enjoy watching, there's an celebrity political figure impersonator named David Fry. He used to work in the mid to the late 60s, early 70s, and he would do impressions of people that we still know, like Richard Nixon, Lyndon Johnson, but also people that are less remembered, such as Hubert Humphrey. And he did spot-on impressions of their physical mannerisms and their speech patterns, which was just amazing. And what I found most intriguing is if you watch closely, and this was also true of Johnny Carson with his monologues, which addressed, the day's news. It didn't have a political bias one way or the other. It just made light of the human aspect of public figures. And they were not partisan jokes. Whether you like Donald Trump, AOC, or Bernie Sanders, for instance, they all lend themselves to some sort of caricature, some sort of impersonation. And it's very fun, and in a subtle way, this type of humor, which is far less prevalent today, kind of brought people together. Now, in my family, growing up, almost always our presidential preferences ran for whoever the Democrat was at the top of the ticket. There was a dislike of Richard Nixon that dated in our family back to the late 1940s when he was running for Congress in California. He was considered to be a, stooge of Joe McCarthy, who was a person who accused a lot of people of being communists, often enough falsely that he ruined some innocent lives. And we called Nixon Tricky Dick, all kinds of lovely names. In retrospect, I have a mixed view of him. He used to spy on political opponents. He was not averse to using his ability to control the IRS, let's say, to make the lives of his opponents difficult. But he did quite a few things, things like social welfare programs, which, such as food stamps and stuff like that. He was the one, despite his staunch anti-communism, who opened up to China. And I wonder today how much of a blessing that is. But if you're gonna slam Richard Nixon for paranoia, for weaponizing the government against political opponents, what we got going on today makes Richard Nixon look like a civil libertarian. Yeah, I hated Nixon when it was fashionable to do so, but if I ever go to California, where I think, Nixon is buried in California, I would probably go to his grave and beg him for forgiveness, because what we got now, as far as a weaponized justice system, a biased media, would put anything Nixon ever did to his political opponents, it would just dwarf it by comparison. So wherever you are, Mr. President Nixon on high, I hope you forgive me. I was young. I didn't know any better. But now a lot of us do. Just one more thing that I remember. My mother's anti-Nixon credentials were impeccable. Now, just to give you a little perspective, she was anti-abortion, pro-life. She was anti-segregation, but anti-affirmative action. She was solid, moderate, middle of the road. But I remember after Nixon was elected for the first time in 1968, she was planning dinner, and she found a recipe for Richard Nixon's favorite scrambled eggs recipe. Now, this had, I think it was ham in it or something like that, and I forget what the spicing was, but my mother did a bang-up job fixing that. And as much as she and I both disliked him at the time, the recipe was very good. And I think that these moments of caricatures that cut across political boundaries for laughs, and the recipe, favorite foods of political leaders and stuff like that, I think it kind of humanizes and nuances our political outlook. Parenthetically, in the late 1950s, when Nikita Khrushchev came to, I forget where it was, but he met with Richard Nixon. I think it was in the United States. And one of the things that Khrushchev liked, which he actually, I think, had made in the Soviet Union, was cornflakes. He thought this staple American breakfast cereal was absolutely fantastic. I also heard about, if you listen to recordings of the kitchen debate, that some of the stuff that Khrushchev said when he was addressing then Vice President Richard Nixon, some of that stuff was absolutely unprintable and was not just translated euphemistically, but mistranslated. If I would have used such language as a teenager as Khrushchev used against Nixon, I would have been grounded. I would have missed 2 nights out minimum of drinking and being stupid. But we don't hear about those things. One of the things I saw when I was in Italy, unlike the United States, which has basically 98% of representation in Congress being Democrats or Republicans, in the Italian parliament you have a bunch of different political parties. When I lived there, it was the Christian Democrats, the Socialists, the Communists, the Social Democrats. There were other little parties in some parts, some local governments. They even had monarchists. And they had political party newspapers. The Italian Communist Party newspaper, and it was openly labeled as such, the central organ of the Italian Communist Party, was L'Unità, Unity. And I think Il Popolo was the socialist paper. I don't remember what the Christian Democrats had. And the fascist party, Movimento Sociale Italiano, was their paper was called Il Secolo, and I know you can still get Il Secolo online. You can get a passable if awkward Google translation of their articles. I like the honesty of somebody openly saying this article, this newspaper presents the view of a political party. I would dearly love it if there would be a Democrat paper, a openly labeled as such, a Republican paper, and maybe even the way American politics work, say a conservative caucus or MAGA, Trumpist newspaper, openly labeled as such, proudly and unabashedly. And that would implicitly hold papers that purport to be unbiased, which I don't believe exists. It would hold them to a standard of sort of navigating some semblance of independence in presenting the news. In election 2020, you had huge swaths of the media like CNN, New York Times, Washington Post, openly dedicated to the stated goal of defeating Donald Trump, putting words in his mouth. I feel it was, to use a biased term, I feel it was a lot of fake news. But I think if we had openly partisan news media labeled as such, that it might force the regional newspapers that pretend to have no political bias, it might force them into some type of honesty and candor. And I would love to see them do that. Now, the way I like to debate things is what works. What will make housing, for instance, not only affordable to renters and buyers, but make it possible for those who own a house and or office property and make a living off it? What will make it viable for them to turn a reasonable profit? Do you go with the rent control model, or do you go with the laissez-faire market model? I don't believe that people who advocate different solutions for me want to make the world a worse place. I think they may be very misguided in some of their solutions, but instead of making ridiculous arguments like they're in favor of starvation, I'm in favor of ending world hunger, want to talk about what will feed us the best and the most efficiently. I think that these discussions would be a lot less acrimonious and a lot more constructive than what we now have going on. I heard a funny joke. You may think it's funny, maybe not. I think Nancy Pelosi, AOC, and Joe Biden were all on an airplane. And Nancy Pelosi says she takes a $100 bill out of her purse and throws it out of the plane, and she says, "There, I'm going to make one person very happy with this $100 bill." So AOC says, "I'm going to make two people very happy," and she throws two $100 bills out of the plane. And then Joe Biden says, "I'm going to outdo all of you. I'm going to make three people very happy." And he throws three $100 bills out of the airplane down to some lucky recipients. So the airplane pilot who's listening to this one-upmanship says, "I got a way y'all could make the whole country happy. Why don't y'all just jump out of the plane and make the whole country happy?" So I'm going to kind of leave it on that note, and I look forward to joining you all next week. This wraps up another weekly episode of Between the Presets. I thank you all for the pleasure of sharing with me my weekly muse. Whatever platform you access, hitting like, subscribe, or leaving a comment is much appreciated. My email address is thewinterriders@gmail.com. thewinterriders@gmail.com. Until next week, adio, which in some African languages means born on Monday or be righteous, and closely resembles adios in Spanish.